can see the links or whoever joins, and then we'll end it in 10 minutes or so. I think that's best. Okay, guys, see you.
Yeah, that's very good. Once I ended mine over here, it's now live where we are, and I can still hear you. So
okay, awesome, great.
so yeah, so Path is here. I'm going to add people in as they ask to be added in, but yeah, so what we're going to do is start session 2 now of our mysticism curriculum by looking at Rumi's poems. And in this class, we're going to get to mostly look at the poems. It's going to be really fun. So I'm going to probably switch this here. And whenever you feel like you're ready to get started, you let me know, and we'll take a break in the middle for discussion.
Okay, sure. So let's get started. The first poem is called Come. Okay. So let's delve into it. It reads thus. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of living, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vow 1,000 times. Come, yet again, come, come. Okay, and the second one is called Come to the Orchard in Spring. Oh, awesome. Your visual aids are just nailing it. And it reads thus. Come to the orchard in spring. There is light and wine and sweethearts in the pomegranate flowers. If you do not come, these do not matter. If you do come, these do not matter. And moving on. Just if you need to rest between the poems, someone just stop me. Okay, the next one is The Many Wines, and it reads thus. God has given us a dark wine, so potent that drinking it we leave the two worlds. God has put into the form of hashish a power to deliver the taster from self-consciousness. God has made sleep so that it erases every thought. God made Majnun love Laila so much that just her dog would cause confusion in him. There are thousands of wines that can take over our minds. Don't think all ecstasies are the same. Jesus was lost in his love for God. His donkey was drunk with barley. Drink from the presence of saints, not from those other jars. Every object, every being is a jar full of delight. Be a connoisseur and taste with caution. Any wine will get you high. Judge like a king and choose the purest. The ones unadulterated with fear or some urgency about what's needed. Drink the wine that moves you as a camel moves when it's been untied and is just ambling about. Okay, very well. The next one is called Don't Go Back to Sleep. And it goes thusly. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill, where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. Okay. And the next one is called A Moment of Happiness, and reads thus. A moment of happiness. You and I, sitting on the veranda, apparently two, but once in soul, you and I. You feel the flowing water of life here, you and I, with the garden's beauty and the birds singing. The stars will be watching us, and we will show them what it is to be a thin crescent moon. You and I, unselfied, will be together, indifferent to idle speculation, you and I. The parrots of heaven will be cracking sugar as we laugh together, you and I. In one form upon this earth, and in one form in a timeless, sweet land. Next one is called Any Chance Meeting, and reads thus. In every gathering, in any chance meeting on the street, there is a shine, an elegance rising up. Today, I recognize that the jewel-like beauty is the presence, our loving confusion, the glow in which watery clay gets brighter than fire, the one we call the friend. Now we go to one called the WATERWHEEL, which reads thus. Stay together, friends. Don't scatter and sleep. Our friendship is made of being awake. The WATERWHEEL accepts water and turns and gives it away, weeping. That way it stays in the garden, whereas another roundness rolls through a dry riverbed looking for what it thinks it wants. Stay here, quivering with each moment like a drop of mercury. Okay, now we will read beyond and do a small pause to process all this. And so beyond reads thusly. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Nice to have you here, Pacific. And nice to have you as an attentive listener, Zara, and all others who are listening. It's so nice to share mysticism in general with you and Rumi in particular.
Thank you for reading those. Do you think you'd be able to read, I think, The Thirsty Fish? Is that the next one?
Yep, that's the next one.
Why don't we try and do those? Thank you.
Okay. So here goes. A thirsty fish. I don't get tired of you. Don't grow weary of being compassionate toward me. All this thirst equipment must surely be tired of me. The water jar, the water carrier. I have a thirsty fish in me that can never find enough of what it's thirsty for. Show me the way to the ocean. Break these half measures. these small containers, all this fantasy and grief. Let my house be drowned in the wave that rose last night out of the courtyard, hidden in the center of my chest. Joseph fell like the moon into my well. The harvest I expected was washed away, but no matter. A fire has risen above my tombstone hat. I don't want learning or dignity or respectability. I want this music and this dawn and the warmth of your cheek against mine. The grief armies assemble, but I'm not going with them. This is how it always is when I finish a poem. A great silence overcomes me, and I wonder why I ever thought to use language.
Wow. Bravo. Holy mackerel. Thank you. So there's a theme in a number of the poems that you've read today. It always feels like it's a shame to talk about the poems at all. We just sort of let them wash over or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of things I'm thinking of. One is this whirling dervish type thing where you can imagine him almost shouting out these lines, as you talked about, where they sort of came to him and he didn't know where they were coming from ahead of time, and they just sort of get shouted out. And then he's spent some time in some of these poems and in some that we're about to read talking about not just the insufficiency, but the inappropriateness of language, which is a funny and interesting thing for a poet to be doing, right? He's saying, I'm using language, but God dang it, it's not good enough. And at the same time, he's doing it in a way where it's doing more than just straightforward propositional language would do, right? He is accomplishing something mystical here. But part of what allows him to accomplish it, and maybe even further than that, a testament that there's something more that can happen beyond even just consideration of the poem, I'm not sure, is his insistently, like he's wrestling with the struggle of trying to do the mystical work of communicating to us something that will bring us to this transcendent place through the use of language, which he's complaining about being insufficient. It's anyway, it's a heck of a thing. I'm really grateful that you're leading this class. Do you want to read the next one for us? I can't remember what it was called.
Okay. Yes, sure. It's called Enough Words, and it pretty much goes in the same kind of theme. Yeah, I didn't kind of select the poems completely at random. I selected them because they seem to have some kinds of pattern in what they address.
Clever.
Okay, so the next poem is called Enough Words and goes like this. How does a part of the world leave the word? How can wetness leave water? Don't try to put out a fire by throwing on more fire. Don't wash a wound with blood. No matter how fast you run, your shadow more than keeps up. Sometimes it's in front. Only full overhead sun diminishes your shadow. But that shadow has been serving you. What hurts you blesses you. Darkness is your candle. Your boundaries are your quest. I can explain this, but it would break the glass cover on your heart, and there's no fixing that. You must have shadow and light source both. Listen and lay your head under the tree of awe. When from that tree feathers and wings sprout on you, be quieter than a dove. Don't open your mouth for even a coo. When a frog slips into the water, the snake cannot get it. Then the frog climbs back out and croaks, and the snake moves toward him again. Even if the frog learned to hiss, still the snake would hear through the hiss the information he needed, the frog voice underneath. But if the frog could be completely silent, then the snake would go back to sleeping, and the frog could reach the barley. The soul lives there, in the silent breath, and that grain of barley is such that when you put it in the ground, it grows. Are these enough words, or shall I squeeze more juice from this? Who am I, my friend? Any words?
No, that was a good one. I know there's so much that we've talked about in our philosophy classes, and there's so many connections we can make, but I think what we should do is just keep reading and just keep listening to them for now.
Yeah. Next one. It's called Only Breath. And it reads thusly. Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the East or the West, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist. I am not an entity in this world or the next. Did not descend from Adam or Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one, and that one call to and know. First, last, outer, inner, only that breath, breathing human being. Okay, next one is called Lovers. And this is really funny because when I read the poems like these with love a lot, I thought, well, he's literally talking about lovers and he's yearning for Shams. But in preparation for these sessions, it lends itself to so many more interpretations that maybe even Rumi would be really happy that we kind of find so much more meaning in these than just literally thinking about lovers. And so, okay, without ado, I'll read Lovers. Lovers. Oh, lovers, lovers, it is time to set out from the world. I hear a drum in my soul's ear, coming from the depths of the stars. Our camel driver is at work. The caravan is being readied. He asks that we forgive him for the disturbance he has caused us. He asks why we travelers are asleep. Everywhere the murmur of departure, the stars, like candles, thrust at us from behind blue veils. And as if to make the invisible plain, a wondrous people have come forth. Okay, moving on to Moving Water. Okay. Moving Water reads thus: when you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy. When actions come from another section, the feeling disappears. Don't let others lead you. They may be blind, or worse, vultures. Reach for the rope of God. And what is that? Putting aside self-will. Because of willfulness, people sit in jail. The trapped bird's wings are tied. Fish sizzle in the skillet. The anger of police is willfulness. You've seen a magistrate inflict visible punishment. Now see the invisible. If you could leave your selfishness, you would see how you've been torturing your soul. We are born and live inside black water, in a well. How could we know what an open field of sunlight is? Don't insist on going where you think you want to go. Ask the way to the spring. Your living pieces will form a harmony. There is a harmony palace that floats in the air, with balconies and clear water flowing through. Infinity everywhere, yet contained under a single tent. Okay, next one. It's entitled Without Cause. Mind you that these titles are none of them given by Rumi. These titles are given by scholars trying to make sense of Rumi's body of work. He wrote his poems without any title. But anyway, for us to figure this out, it's called Without Cause. And reads thusly: love is reckless, not reason. Reason seeks a profit. Love comes on strong, consuming herself, unabashed. Yet, in the midst of suffering, love proceeds like a millstone, hard-surfaced and straightforward. Having died of self-interest, she risks everything and asks for nothing. Love gambles away every gift God bestows. Without cause, God gave us being. Without cause, give it back again. And now we go to what was said to the rose, which reads thusly: what was said to the rose? What was said to the rose that made it open was said to me here in my chest. What was told the cypress that made it strong and straight? What was whispered the jasmine? So it is what it is. Whatever made sugarcane sweet, whatever was said to the inhabitants of the town of Chigil in Turkestan that makes them so handsome. Whatever lets the pomegranate flower blush like a human face, that is being said to me now. I blush. Whatever put eloquence in language, that's happening here. The great warehouse doors open. I feel with gratitude, chewing a piece of sugarcane, in love with the one to whom every that belongs. And finally, we have No Flag. And it reads thusly: I used to want buyers from my words. Now I wish someone would buy me away from words. I've made a lot of charmingly profound images. Scenes with Abraham and Abraham's father, Azar, who was also famous for icons. I'm so tired of what I've been doing. Then one image without form came, and I quit. Look for someone else to tend the shop. I'm out of the image making business. Finally, I know the freedom of madness. A random image arrives. I scream, "Get out!" It disintegrates. Only love. Only the holder the flag fits into. And wind. No flag. Okay, and this was the last one for this session. Uh, Feel free to share your thoughts, Zara, and all others participating.
Thank you, Roger. That was really fun. Holy mackerel. So anybody who's watching on YouTube will read your questions if you ask them in the comments there, however that communication goes through. It's kind of amazing how he can deal with. Have you ever noticed people who are trying to get to sort of the ultimate nature of reality, and they do what I'm doing right now. They try to use like hand gestures, like words aren't good enough to navigate that area. So there's something physical going on, and then they're sort of, yeah, sometimes they'll say like 8 different words to try to sort of get at some sort of a concept because nothing is really sufficient. I remember there's there's a line in the New Testament where Paul speaks about, I think it was Paul. He speaks about sighs that are too deep for words. Like, so there's some sort of an expression that's happening, but it's not propositional. Clearly, Rumi is consciously and explicitly talking about and trying to introduce us to a picture or bring us closer to something like that. It's something you can experience while listening to his poems, but also, he's talking about the fact that that's what he's attempting to do while he's writing his poems, which is pretty fun. Yeah. I have some questions for you. You talked about sort of the process through which Rumi would be inspired to give these poems. It was I don't remember all the details. So would he be sitting there and contemplating, and then sort of the fit would eventually come upon him, and then he'd be whirling around? Was there a crowd watching? All eyes were on him, or was he just sort of alone with a scribe who was writing it down real quickly, or what was going on with that?
It seems that it was heterogeneous how his poems came about. I'm not absolutely sure about this, but he was once walking through his town of Konya, and he listened to the blacksmiths pounding on the metal, and he just felt the rhythm of all the blacksmiths in the region pounding, and he started to whirl, and supposedly that's how the whirling dervishes came about, and he started the specific Sufi order. But way before Rumi, way before in the time of the Old Testament, there is at least one account tucked away in the Old Testament that describes these mystics who would dance to music, entranced with the music, flailing away and dancing with total abandon, and reciting lines of poetry, probably in a time when poetry was completely an oral tradition, and improvising. Probably they would enter into an altered state of consciousness just by the music and dancing, feverish dancing. There are even illustrations of the Sufi masters dancing, some really respected masters, but they dance with total abandon, flailing about their limbs, and they have these long sleeves, and their sleeves are all over the place while they dance, like a really um, raving to the dance. And even if it's just this, they probably will alter their state of consciousness, and then possibly substances like hashish might get involved as well, and and who knows what else. But Coleman Barks described in one of his lectures. Coleman Barks is the translator of many Rumi poems, and produced several volumes on Rumi's body of work, adapted to English with these kinds of eloquence and evocativeness of the poems that I just read. These are thanks to Coleman Barks' efforts, and he would describe that Rumi as well recited poetry, improv poetry, while in these rituals of dance and music. These rituals are called sama, and when a practitioner of sama enters into a state of annihilation of the self, so arguably a state of altered consciousness, they employ the term fana when the mystic enters into a state of annihilation of the self, and supposedly by the self annihilating, then whatever it is that is sublime, that is divine, that is above, or that is essential to the cosmos, supposedly that presence can manifest much more intensely through the mystic, who now is a conduit from whatever it is that is manifesting it. We employ many terms: Allah, logos, Tao, God, etc., etc. So I hope I answered your question, and feel free to
Yes.
pick more.
No, that's really good. There's I'm just sharing images of current day shamanistic rituals that are similar. Yeah, that's very good. Now, he talks in one of his poems that we looked at today, he talks about sort of what happens when he's finished with all of this, where he sort of collapses and finally he's done even looking for words. And it's as if he's trying to reach that consummate state, that orgasmic state where all is one. And so the words are sort of the friction that helps him to get there. But there was a poem that we read where after it's over, he's like, okay, now I wonder why I ever used words at all. Right? I think that's the line in his poem, is now I wonder why I ever thought to use words at all. It's interesting. So I think you said there was this image where he would be dancing in a circle, and it's almost as if each line would come to him he'd shout out the line, not knowing what the next line would be, maybe forgetting what the previous three lines were or something. Who knows what was in his mind?
And his scribe or his assistant is just scribbling or trying to memorize whatever is coming out, probably.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, that poor fella isn't allowed to participate because he has to do that sort of work. That's funny. Yeah, that's very interesting. So I wonder if we should talk about, what is the role, because there's a lot of group ceremonies. One of the interesting things about Rumi as a mystic is that he's basically being the conduit for this thing. And so sometimes you have a singular prophetic figure who's the conduit for the voice of God, or you've got a singular poet who's getting in touch with the muses and does their thing. But often what you have is a cultural gathering where everybody is sort of playing the part that their cultural position allows them to play in, sort of, you could say putting on a drama, or like enacting a play or participating in a ritual where you sort of know where you are in the community and what it is that you get to bring, sort of like each group is bringing a piece of the puzzle, or each member is bringing a piece of the puzzle to this thing. Whereas there's something singular. It's almost doctoral. It's like there's like well, there's a medical practice overlap between shamanism and and medicine, where it's like this is the witch doctor, right? That's why we have that phrase, right? So this is the one person who's gone out beyond death and sort of can bring to us hints of the image of the grand unification of it all, or something like that. And Rumi's doing it in poetic form. I think there's other ways of doing it as well, but
in session one you listed several ways, which was a really interesting intro. Involving poetry, of course. It's not, I don't think that all poetry should be put on the same level when we compare Rumi to poetry that is more like about the more physical, attractive kind of love or eroticism. Well, it really is a different worlds, completely different worlds. I felt a huge warmth inside by reading these poems, and one cannot read these poems, especially a bunch of them, and not be somehow moved, basically.
Now, I'll agree with you that there's absolutely a different level here, right? So this is worth talking about. So mystical poetry, Rumi, we're going to put that in this category. Other poetry, we're not insulting it or slagging it off. It's fantastic and wonderful, but it's definitely not even attempting to do this sort of thing. So what is the difference? I'm not sure I would draw the line in the themes. So first, I'll agree with you. It's very clear that when Rumi's talking about wine or sexual romance or the unification between lovers or things like that, that he's discussing those as what they are, which is two things. One, they're a metaphor for the grand cosmic story. But two, they're also a manifestation of that same thing on certain levels, right? So he's pointing at other ways that you can reach transcendence. You can reach it through the sort of mystical, hypnotic work of his poetry. But in that poetry, he's reminding you, and that's part of the mystical, hypnotic work, is he's reminding you of other ways of reaching transcendence: sport and wine and alcohol and sex and whatever else that he brings, nature and things like that. So I'll admit that he's not saying, it's not a treatise saying, hey, go stop listening to my poems and go make love or go get drunk or something like that. He's clearly not doing that. But at the same time, he is affirming those things, right? Because in two ways. One, the fact that they're metaphorically pointing at what he's trying to get us to is one affirmation. But two, he's not, I don't think he's pointing at those things because they're signposts that point to something else, right? They're not just a metaphor. They contain within themselves something of what he's talking about. And so by imagining yourself or remembering being drunk or sexual congress or nature and sunrises and the things he's talking about, he's putting your mind in that place where you've also been experiencing the thing that he's helping you to experience now.
Yeah, for sure. Drunkenness brings with it some form of self-annihilation, for sure. A partial one, to be sure, because when people are drunk and they are prone to aggressiveness, their more temperate parts is annihilated and their aggressiveness is uncaged sometimes. And even in one part of Rumi's work, he explains that the reason why in the Islamic world alcohol has been banned. So before, in the Persian era, it was allowed, and then it was banned. And it's because they just started to assume that most people have a beast underneath the surface, and the alcohol would just allow this beast to manifest. So no alcohol. And to continue just
Please.
before, he clearly seems to be borrowing many aspects of real life that people can relate to more closely. He even, in one poem that we might approach in the future that I listened to today, he compares bread making with love making, but also using this comparison, this similarity, to point towards again the reaching for the sublime, for reaching contact with the arche. And he clearly seems to be doing that. He's really struggling with things that are very difficult to put into words, maybe totally impossible, totally futile to put into words, but he kind of tries to use the mechanics of things in real life to help guide us to where he is trying to point at, like a frantic, feverish Sufi that he's trying to point at it, because he kind of experienced that a lot, either in Fana during these Sama sessions, or while he was during his 3 years with Shams, the mystic, the roving Sufi mystic, in which he would engage in these really deep conversations where they feel very intimately connected, and they can, at the level of the soul, so to say, and they can speak their minds freely. The conversation just flows effortlessly and naturally.
Okay, let's hammer this out a bit, because I think I might be slightly, well. First of all, I might be wrong, and secondly, we might have a slight disagreement here. Let me try this on for size. If I wrote a poem, you shouldn't read it. I wouldn't even read it. Okay, so the distinction between Rumi's poems and just anybody writing a poem exists. Let's put that aside. It's possible that you're drinking alcohol the wrong way, or you haven't dealt with your inner demons yet. And so it's not so much the distinction is that you can get partially there on this other path. Maybe you can get entirely there on the other path if you've done it the right way, right? Just like you mentioned, alcohol can be, it's a disinhibitor. And so if you have a violent monster within you, that's just coming out. Well, clearly, no one should give you the advice to reach spiritual enlightenment and transcendence by getting drunk. This isn't me trying to justify drinking. I never drink. It's not something I avoid on purpose. It just never occurs to me. But it does occur to me that somebody could drink properly. Somebody can write poems properly. That type of thing. And then just like that, what I'm trying to say is that there might be a path to this transcendence, that he's not just saying it's a metaphor that sort of partially points you towards it, but he's basically, when you're reading Rumi properly, or when you're listening to his poems and it's having the effect it's supposed to have, you should be having a proper drunken experience at the end of it, even if you've never had that through alcohol or can't have that through alcohol. And likewise, sex can be done to use people, or violently or terribly, can be damaging to your soul and other people's souls. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a right way to do it, and an actual unification of the feminine and the masculine in a proper attitude. And you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I wasn't attempting to be absolutist in terms of saying that alcohol is absolutely bad and end of discussion. I just drank for the only beer I drank this month in supper just a while ago. So I'm I'm not a Muslim,
Sure.
and I also am not an absolute guy that just doesn't drink. Period. No, I do drink in moderation. And also, yeah, I agree with you. I agree that alcohol, as a form of self annihilation, in some people it might work. For some people, meditation might work, while for
Exactly.
others it might not. For some people, certain substances produce
I
bad
mean,
trips.
yeah.
In others, it's like they open the door to the infinite and see the face of God or something like that.
Yeah, that's their testimony anyway. I'm too nervous to try it, but yeah, no. So yeah. So you're absolutely right, and I think what's cool about the possibility of that would be to say what it's possible for us to get out of Rumi if we can figure out how to unlock the keys and really get it. It should be equivalent to the best sexual congress, the best getting drunk, the best. It should be a psychedelic trip, right? I mean, that's what we mean by mysticism, right? And again, I don't do the psychedelic thing, but the people who have the experience where they say it changed my life, and I don't ever have to do it again, but it's one of the most important experiences of my life, and I see the world differently, and it was a grand unification of all things. That's the way they talk about it, but they talk about it in a very similar way to what Rumi's talking about. I think the idea is that, well, first of all, you're right. I don't recommend alcohol as the path anybody takes, right? So I'm trying to say maybe for certain older, wiser, very enlightened people, right? That's how Rumi talks about drinking, by the way. Or maybe at least you'd have to be older and wiser and well developed if you're a man to get there through alcohol, perhaps, if I'm remembering the hints of what he's doing in his poetry when he talks about that being a path. But in any case, it might be the right path for some. So, I mean, I'm just repeating what you said.
But also look at alcohol as a metaphor. He talks about the different wines, and it's almost sure that he's talking about different delights in life, different
Yes.
different sense pleasure experiences, different things that might have their purpose, but they might also be things that we get too attached to. We get too enamored with a fine Chardonnay kind of experience, or whatever. I'll also pull
100%.
here a few commentary from Coleman Barks on this. He wrote really interesting passages on this, but it will take me a little while to get it.
Okay,
So
well,
feel
I'll
free
just say
to
I agree
compliment.
with you completely with that, and that's exactly why I said he's not saying in this poem, "Here's a go get drunk and then you'll get there." No, you're supposed to be able to get there just through the poems. He's not bringing up these other paths to say go over there to get it. That's the way. It's not an argument saying, go do that in order to get to this place. But like you said, it's metaphorical, but it's also Rumi's poems should be equivalent to a psychedelic trip or a proper getting drunk or proper sexual congress or something like that in what it is he's at least trying to induce within us. And that's sort of what we define mystical texts as, works that are trying to bring you to a certain place. Did you find what you're looking for?
Yep.
Okay, great.
I
Please go
can
ahead.
read from it. Okay. So now, in the words of Coleman Barks, who lived with Rumi's body of work for quite some years, and he goes like this: on the tavern. In the tavern are many wines, the wine of delight in color and form and taste, the wine of the intellect's agility, the fine port of stories, and the cabernet of soul singing. Being human means entering this place where entrancing varieties of desire are served. The grape skin of ego breaks and the pouring begins. Fermentation is one of the oldest symbols for human transformation. When grapes combine their juice and are closed up together for a time in a dark place, the results are spectacular. This is what lets two drunks meet, so that they don't know who is who. Pronouns no longer apply in the tavern's mad world of excited confusion and half-articulated wantings. Okay, that's the entire paragraph.
This is commentary on Rumi by whom?
By Coleman Barks.
Coleman Barks. Okay. I'm just going to put that in the commentary. That's exactly what I was thinking when he was. I wanted to talk about. So his multiple types of wine that he's talking about, that's exactly what it is. And what he's saying, I think, I mean, I'm not going to reduce what he's doing to propositions. So let me reword that from what he's saying to something more like,
You could
a
study
partial.
wine. You
Oh,
could
go ahead.
study wine your entire life without ever tasting it. And the first moment you taste it, you will be amazed, even if you had studied wine your entire life. I think
Yes.
it replaces not just propositions, but an entire amount of, like, a field of study, an entire field of study. It doesn't do justice to the experience. Okay, go ahead.
You're right. Just to, before I finish my point, to bounce off of what you just said here, I want to share a story I was talking with a friend about the other day. C.S. Lewis had this idea of a beam of light coming in through a barn door, and you measure it and you take its length, breadth, and width, and you study it and you look at it, and you're really concerned with this beam of light. And that's one way of doing it. Or you could just tilt your head down and let the beam of light hit you in the eye. And that's another way of looking at the beam of light, or rather looking along it, as he says, which is what you're talking about there. So what's interesting about his many different wines, and what this commentary by Coleman Barks says, I got that spelt right, correct? B.A. Coleman Barks.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I don't want to use that language. What I'm getting out of it, that's a little bit too relativistic. I think it means at least this much, or it's hinting at least this much, right? We never want to pretend that we've reduced something mythopoetic into propositions, and you could have just heard these propositions and then never heard the story or never read the poem, because that's not how these things work. But one of the things we might be able to extract from it, and I'll throw this out there for criticism, is the idea, I think this is what Coleman Barks is talking about, is saying, okay, imagine there's a mountain of enlightenment, and being at the top of the mountain, or rather journeying to the top of the mountain, gets you to this cosmic perspective where you can sort of see the proper role of all things, right? If you're too zoomed in on scraping your knee while you're trying to climb the mountain, you're only seeing one part of reality. But from the top of the mountain, you can see the whole horizon or something, the 360 panorama, whatever. So maybe there's a long, slow, grassy, hikey journey that you could take to the top of it. Maybe there's a steep cliff that you could drill safety harnesses into and tag team up your way. Maybe there's a bouldery, rocky path that's very steep that you could hike up or something. Maybe with psychedelics, you can take a helicopter to the top. I'm not really sure how that works. But I remember Jung said, beware of wisdom you have not earned. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm a little bit skeptical of that, although I've heard some very enlightened people talk about that being their path to the top. So I always have to include it. But in any case, these different types of wines, we can think of them as different ways of being drunk, or, well, because that's what wines are, obviously, or just different ways of being in the world. And so this brings up the fact that it's characterological. It's saying, okay, you could be in the zone in this way, or in this way, or in this way. And there was another poem that you read about the water wheel. And then he has this line where he says, there's another wheel that rolls through the desert, something like that, right? So there's other ways of rolling through life that are not watery and life affirming, right? So, right, just because you're on a path, you have to be on a path, you're in the world, but you could be, heading into the valley, or digging into hell, or going, through some desert, or rolling based on just being driven by your passions or your hungers or your sense of lack or something like that. None of that is anything like transcendence, where that's the type of thing he's talking about, where you're at one and at peace, and you understand sort of the cosmic dance of opposites or whatever. Let's not get into those things. But so anyway, what do you think about, I think I've understood Coleman Barks correctly. What do you think about this idea of Rumi's talking about multiple types of wine as, he says, like narrative and story and poetry, and there's these different paths of getting to that drunken state, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah. I think it's a nice and plausible reading of this, since the way in which he enumerates what's going on here, it pretty much matches what you are getting out of it. So yeah, it's also pretty much my interpretation.
So maybe I should have not just told my stupid metaphor there without explaining what the heck I'm talking about a little bit. So, when you're tag teaming and you're doing things with peer review, it's a very slow scientific journey to that. They're probably not to the top yet. When they get there, they'll find Jesus and Rumi and Moses all meditating with the Buddha at the top of the damn thing. But there's a very long millennial path where it's like, okay, I don't know how these people got to these truths so many tens of thousands of years ago, but they put it in story and in narrative and in poetry and in art, painting and sculpture. It's all that mythopoetic path. It's sort of easier but longer in a sense, or you can get there earlier that way or something. And then there's that Coleman Barks talked about this propositional philosophical path. I think of that as like a rocky bouldery path that's very difficult and easy to get stuck on, but it's a way of achieving that ultimate climb over the top boulder, and now you're at the place that you earned to be at or something. Again, this could all not be true, but I think that Rumi's hinting at that type of an idea when he's talking about these multiple options for transcendent drunkenness. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to look something up here, because when you talked about these, you said something about you can study wine forever and then drinking it is different, right?
Yeah, if you imagine you're abstaining from wine while being a wine scientist, and there are wine scientists employed in the wine industry. The field is quite an interesting field, because wine has many substances, and they study how by altering the processes of fermentation, how wines change, and their properties change, and all these components of the wine, the molecules can be tested in a lab, and they can be quantified, and they can describe what they're quantifying. But without the wine reaching their mouth and their tongue and etc., they won't know for sure how the wine tastes. They won't be able to do it justice just by giving lab reports and describing the constituents.
Roger, you're a scientist amongst other things. I want to share something with you. You may have heard of this before, but I want to share something with you that I think you're going to really dig, because I made an absurd claim that maybe the scientific path could get you to that top if you're really good at it, and it's probably pretty steep and difficult. After winning the second Nobel Prize, I think it was his second one, Richard Feynman was told by people that he needs to go and take a job at Cambridge or whatever to be the head of whatever popular understanding of science. And he said to himself, he said, well, there's nobody at my level. How come everyone around me is telling me what the next step for my life is supposed to be? So instead, he decided to go to Caltech and teach undergrads physics. And he taught undergraduate physics to Caltech students. And physicists from around the world came to listen to Richard Feynman teach basic physics and his way of understanding it. You can actually get, I think it's in 3 parts. You can get it from certain libraries or ILL it, the notes that they took and put it into a class. I remember taking it out of a library once, and in the first lecture, Richard Feynman gives the context of different branches of science, physics and psychology and geology and chemistry. And I won't read you everything he talks about, but it was great because he would get up on stage with a piece of chalk and he would fill up the chalkboard saying exactly what he wanted to say, and then he'd leave. And then all the other people would try to put problems together for the students so they could actually, have a grading system or something. But he ended that lecture this way. You may have heard this before, but if you haven't, I'm really pleased to introduce you to it.
Yeah, please do. I haven't yet heard it.
Okay, so this is how he ended that first lecture. After discussing physics and all these other different branches of science and how they relate to each other, he said, a poet once said, "The whole universe is in a glass of wine." We'll probably never know in what sense he meant that, for poets do not write to be understood. But it is true that if we look at a glass of wine closely enough, we see the entire universe. Things are There are the things of physics, the twisting liquid which evaporates depending on the wind and weather, the reflections of the glass, and our imagination adds the atoms. The glass is a distillation of the Earth's rocks, and in its composition we see the secrets of the universe's age and the evolution of stars. What strange array of chemicals are in the wine? How did they come to be? There are the ferments, the enzymes, the substrates, and the products. There in wine is found the great generalization: all life is fermentation. Nobody can discover the chemistry of wine without discovering, as did Louis Pasteur, the cause of much disease. How vivid is how vivid is the claret, pressing its existence into the consciousness that watches it. If our small minds, for some convenience, divide this glass of wine, this universe, into parts, physics, biology, geology, astronomy, psychology, and so on, remember that nature does not know it. So let us put it all back together, not forgetting ultimately what it is for. Let it give us one more final pleasure. Drink it and forget it all. So there's something there's something whirly dervish about Richard Feynman's lectures. There's something inspired about that, and I think
I would really love to know what he was reading, especially the things that really hit him like a train when he was reading.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's things like Rumi.
Richard Feynman was Rumi-esque in a lot of ways himself as well. You know, I think he was well, he was a heck of a guy. And it's so interesting because he's so I don't want to get into we're not going to change the lecture to be about Richard Feynman, but he so rarely was a scientific soul, and he knew how to think instinctively that way, and also to have a personality and a life. And I won't talk any more about him except to remind us of the story where he went to South America and found an artist who was great at painting, and Richard Feynman couldn't draw. And he said to him, he said, Leonardo da Vinci was a scientist and an artist, and I know physics. I've won a couple Nobel Prizes, and I don't know how to draw. And you are an artist, but you don't know anything about physics. So how about every Sunday I come here and teach you physics, and every other Sunday you teach me how to paint? And we'll be Leonardo da Vinci together. So anyway, the point is, and they did that. They did that every week. And it was Richard Feynman's art got really good. And he did a lot of other artistic accomplishments as well. But in any case, he was sort of a very, very, very rare kind of person, is a person who can really be a scientist. And an infinitely more rare person is a person who can really be a scientist and also be in touch with the mythopoetic and the grand picture of it all, as he talks about there. Anyway, it's we'll stop talking about him, but I thought you might appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, I do. I do appreciate people realizing that there is not only one way of being, not only one doctrine, not only one tradition. They realize that they can be in the position of the Eye of Horus for traditions, for doctrines, for ways of being, and they just figure out that for each circumstance, for each occasion, you either study a particular way or in which the glass of wine is, or you drink it.
Yeah.
And you can be the same human being that does both.
Yeah, that's right. You can. I think it's helpful because we live in a scientism age, and people are often there's many people who are very interested in woo-woo and mysticism and things like that. But there's also sort of a sense, even amongst that community, that you can't even say you're interested in that without knowing that you're going to get a lot of insults your way, because that's not the right way to be thinking. I think one of the things to stress is that this path that Rumi is giving us is aiming at the same thing that other paths are aiming at. And if your science hasn't gotten you to that, well, then discard your science or do it better or something.
Yeah.
But there's a goal here, and that goal is the arche. It's understanding the nature of being. And so it's helpful to introduce the idea of saying, well, wait a minute. I think a lot of people might be very skeptical. Is there something that can be gained on this mysticism path? Is this totally different from everything else? And convince me there's something there. It's like, no, no, no. This is the point of life. This is the point of art and poetry and sculpture and painting. It's the point of philosophy. It's the point of prophecy and religious traditions. It's the point of science, ultimately, which we'll have to defend more in another setting, because I'm sure that's not yet convincing. But yeah, so mysticism is, if we're going to try to, we said we're going to try to come up with different definitions as we went along. Mysticism is various methods for trying to induce an immediate real world experience with that thing, whatever that thing is, right? That's mysticism. Philosophy might be trying to comprehend and get your ideas straight so that you can eventually get there or something. But mysticism is about either disciplines of fasting and prayer, or it's, you know, written through philosophical texts like Descartes, or whatever path it is. With Rumi, it's a poetic attempt for you to just be smashed in the face by a poem that is supposed to do and is attempting to immediately sort of hit you with a cosmic tsunami wave of getting to the top of that mountain, sort of a thing. If I wish I could find better words for it, but that's all we mean by mysticism so far, anyway.
I think it's also worthy to address how he has patterns in how he weaves his poetry together. He has many poems on musing about the nature of being and self-knowledge. As we've seen in the first session, we've seen a bunch of those, kind of like asking, who am I, and how can I investigate this further in his poems, and also giving a bunch of insights around this question of who am I. Today we've seen a few poems that completely smash language as the all the be all end all of figuring things out. It clearly shows that, yeah, language, yeah, it might work for everyday things, but when you're reaching for the sublime, language just doesn't cut it. and in some poems he shows it quite amusingly and quite spectacularly, how it just doesn't cut it. Also, in the previous session, he also showed a bunch of poets, like the Guest House is one of those, in which he gives us some recipes to stop rejecting pieces of being, basically, to accept all of being, even if it tempts us into bitterness or sounds grievous or disturbing and whatnot. So a lot of commonality with Buddhists and Stoics as well, and Taoists too. They all have ways of incorporating the shadowy part of us, and also the grief and frustration, the pain and suffering that the world ever so often throws at every single one of us. So he addresses these topics and more, of course.
Yeah, well, and he talked about running or not running from the shadow. I would say that tempting towards bitterness thing, that's not doing what Rumi's telling you to do, right? That's by definition not integrating, not embracing, not being okay with, to some degree. So yeah, absolutely, I would agree with that. I think he's aiming at a total yes saying of being. Probably a one way of putting
it. It's so tempting to think that Rumi was one of the Rumi's body of work was one of the reading materials that helped shape and influence shape Nietzsche's mind, because of how Nietzsche borrowed the story. That I think it would be appropriate for us to go through it in the next session. This story of a snake entering a man's mouth, and then the wise sage that witnessed it all, he just goes crazy and is frantic about saving the man and whatnot. And it's so funny, and at the same time it shows profound truths about being, about us incorporating insights that are wrong, that will work against us, basically, that will degrade us, like integrating beliefs that will lead us toward nihilism or depression. uh, and I think, at least for me, the snake kind of stands for that. And so many people would benefit for having someone to drive these kinds of snakes out, even if at first they will really they will resent it. They won't like it. The act of taking the snake out is unpleasant, to put it mildly.
Huh. I was about to say something, but now I don't think it's true.
Yeah, but say it anyway, and I'll disagree with you.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about these different religious traditions and these different attempts at getting at what it means to be human, and how to relate properly to the divine and to each other and to nature and all of that. So here's what I was going to say, and then something occurred to me that maybe makes it not as true as I thought it was, which is that the problem with snakes, the real problem with snakes, is that you can't build walls secure enough to keep them out of the garden. If the walls are so secure that the snakes are out, nothing can grow either, right? The snakes are coming. They're coming from within. They're going to find their way in there one way or another. So, the Zarathustrian answer is, when the snake crawls into your mouth, bite its head off, right? But it's that Jungian notion of integration of the shadow. And he was frantic. Zarathustra was frantic when he saw the person being bit as well. So that's a cool connection. We'll definitely go into both of those passages, that poem and that passage, in the next session for sure. That's a great idea.
I think it would be awesome. I would read the poem with the story of the snake by Rumi, and you could read the passage by Nietzsche's Zarathustra.
We'll do a compare and contrast. That'll be really, really
like two lives of Plutarch side by side.
Yeah. That'll be great. That's good. So there's this mythopoetic or this philosophical answer that we'll explore in the next class from Rumi, and there's this mythopoetic and philosophical answer from Zarathustra. It occurred to me while I was saying all this, you can't keep the snakes out, the Jungian, integrate the shadow, all of this. It occurred to me, well, Christ crushes the head of the snake, right? So there's a religious mythopoetic tradition that says, actually, there's a way of being in the world that is the truth, right? Christ said, I am the truth. So there's a way of saying, okay, if you embrace the truth, like you said, Rumi is saying, okay, let's have a yes saying to all things, right? If you embrace the truth, there's a thing that will crush the head of the snake, right? You're not building walls to keep it out. You're not denying that it's there. Obviously, that's what people tend to do at first, and it just gets bigger. Obviously, those are not the solutions, but there's an integration, or but at least two of the traditions are telling us that there's a way of biting its head off, or of crushing it with your heel or something. In any case, I don't know.
Or in Rumi's case, regurgitating the snake with a bunch of rotten apples that will facilitate regurgitation.
Oh, baby, relax. Don't give it away.
You frightened the dog.
This dog is such a lovely dog, but he is a drama queen. And I slammed my hand on my chair, and he's 2 feet away from me, and he acted like he was being beat because, well, he's a rescue, and I think he's been through a lot. But hey, buddy, nobody's upset at you. We're just passionately talking about poetry. Come on, buddy. It's all good. I love you. He's a good boy. He's such a good boy. Anyway,
but I think that you might interpret the snake as a part of us to begin with. That's a possibility. And if that is the case, well, the Jungian wisdom is to figure out that it's there, so that it doesn't grow untamed and doesn't wreck the entire thing, the entire system, and behaves properly and aligns with the rest and harmonizes. But yeah, that's the case if it's the shadow. But if the snake is a belief that has been planted in us by an abusive parent or a bully at school or a teacher that has no business teaching, shouldn't be, or a
our own corruption.
or a malicious coworker, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he kind of implants a thought in you that says you are inadequate in some way, in some form or sense. Then you need to figure out that that is there and it's not yours, it's from someone else, it doesn't belong there, and you need to crush its head or bite its head off and remove it as effectively and as painlessly as possible. But probably it will not be painless. Probably it will still go, lead you through hell a bit, but afterwards
That's the way you get to heaven.
Yeah, but afterwards you will be better than how you begin with. That's the idea.
Virgil, Homer, Dante, Milton, you have to go through hell to get to heaven. Absolutely.
Yeah, Churchill says keep going.
So this Jungian idea, yeah, right. This Jungian idea, like that's a good quote. This Jungian idea of integrating the shadow can only be true if there's something valuable about the shadow, right? So this thing looks like it's all negative and all bad, but it's there for a reason. It's a part of the archetypal nature of being. So if it's doing a bunch of damaging bad things, well, it needs to be tamed. It needs to be brought under control. But so there's, I like this idea of Rumi talking about regurgitation. There's this imagery in Judeo-Christian, or at least in Christian mysticism, of throwing up of frogs as a symbol of demons leaving the body. Again, it's amphibial, it's close to reptilian. But there's this other thing of saying, okay, well, you slay the dragon, but the dragon isn't just a dragon, it's a thing that's hoarding gold. So you get the gold if you slay the dragon, but if you avoid the dragon, you never get the gold that is a part of the duality of dragon and gold hoarding, right? So, and I like your list of, it's basically the various sources of malevolence and how they can enter your life. And of course, they can enter your life by your own choice to be bitter and go down that road yourself. The malevolence can come from others or from yourself. Here's a wild idea I've never had before, which is this. Okay, what do we do about the teachers and the bullies and the idiots and the people that are just trying to make everything worse? And I thought to myself, well, what motivates them to do that? I wonder if you know you're in hell, if you get a sick, perverted pleasure of trying to kick someone further into hell. And then I wonder if the reason why you do that is that you feel helpless. And what the person's doing when they do that for you is giving you a gift, because what they really want is to see you climb out. Okay, right? So you're triumphing over. It might take decades, but if you choose to triumph over it, even their own malevolence, which is really the hard thing to get over, it's sort of the boulder you can't get past, is why would somebody want to make things worse? Well, maybe they wanted to make it worse because if you get out, they have some hope that there's a way of getting out. I'm not saying go to them and try to help them or anything, get away from malevolent people. But in any case, I don't know. That's an idea I've never
Imagine this that happened to me even today. So a person in a managerial position above me, after me and my colleagues delivered her some bad news, that if we hadn't delivered it now, it would do even more damage later. But still, she was so disturbed that she started screaming and all. And I just kept my cool because I've went all over through this many times. I've been drilling for this so many times with the Stoics, with the Sufis, with the training on emotional management, etc. And I know that this is kind of like a play, a theater. So I didn't take it too seriously. And I let the emotion of that person come and go. And then she was a bit like a different person. She was even making jokes and everything. Had I engaged the anger with further anger at the time, I would kind of be like putting gasoline over a fire. And and I just let that little light that's lit with anger just light and then just fade away. And I didn't give it any validation or any importance, because I know that the bigger picture is, well, I didn't die. No, she didn't die. I wasn't tortured. She wasn't tortured. Uh, I didn't fall into nihilism. Apparently, neither did she. So there's a whole bunch of list of things for which I am grateful that didn't happen, that are way more severe than this. And
Yeah.
so, in contrast, because we like to uh, measure things, and we can only measure things with comparisons. We can only figure things out in life, either with language, and we delude ourselves a lot with language, or comparing different experiences. We try to, as Stoics, for instance, or Sufis, or Taoists or Buddhists, to contemplate mortality, to contemplate ephemerality, impermanence, to look at the glass and know that somewhere in the timeline the glass is broken. And if you kind of train yourself to see the bigger picture, these things around you, the chaos around you, will erupt and you will be fine. And maybe you will even be propelled to do something better, maybe even something heroic, who knows.
On that awesome note and good narrative and good story, a little parable, what I'm going to do is we're going to end this, and anybody who's in the spaces here, we're going to do our after chat, simultaneous sip, whatever the heck special things we're going to do. So we'll end the live broadcast and we'll do the after show. That was a good note to end on. Thank you.